People build identity, that is, a self, around small things. 100 years ago, people would build identity around their church, their belief, their family, and sometimes about the local community they belong to. Nowadays, people build an identity about themselves with the TV. This identity that people build is often like a bucket in which they pour themselves into, and then they identify with it. This identity can be a bit problematic at times, especially when that of which you built your identity upon suddenly changes, or even worse, is ripped out from under your feet, and where suddenly you feel you are free falling because you don't really have anything stable that you've built your identity on. In Zen, we see this often when people come to the Zen Center and start wanting to wear robes. They cut their hair. They want to be ordained into the Sangha. They want to wear the rakusu, which has the name also of the magic bib. It's a bit derogatory, but that's another name for it. And they build this like Zen identity. This identity has been recognized within the Zen community and has been called Zen Stink. Zen Stink is simply building a false self, or sometimes it's also called putting a head on top of your head. This is actually contrary to the core values of Zen, in which we implore people not only to not build a self, but to identify the self that they have already built on other things and to abandon it. When saying this to Zen students who have put an exorbitant amount of time into their Zen training, building up their Zen identity, and then to point out that all they've built up was a shit pile that stinks, you can only imagine the reactions I get. If you would say that they are grateful and bow to me for the realization, I certainly wish that was the case. Though the reality is that I get run out and shown the door real quick at these Zen centers. When we build a self on something, especially something so transitory as in this phenomenal world, which anything is, because everything is decaying and dying, we only create suffering. Bucket loads and bucket loads of suffering, oceans of suffering, seas of suffering, unending suffering. And it's the suffering that flips us into delusion, and where we are trying to escape the suffering that we are creating. I know this sounds completely paradoxical and completely idiotic, in where we become our own worst enemy. Yet, however, this is exactly what Zen students do. They become the very thing they never wanted to be, and they become the monster that they were trying to defeat the whole time. But oh, it gets worse. When the Zen student starts to realize the fact that they've become something that they've been preaching against, they deny it. And then, even worse, they deny the teachings of the Buddha that point out this very same fact. And at times, they will basically say that Buddhism has no relevance to their Zen practice. Of course, as the wise men would come along and pray to them and beg them to give up this false self, this stinky Zen that they have surrounded themselves with, that they have built entire stupas and entire temples with this stinky Zen. The poor Zen student cannot see past it, and thus is lost, wallowing in this dung-filled, stinky Zen temple that they call practice. Now, who am I? I'm not your Roshi, I'm not your Zen teacher, And I have been told that many times when I bring up this fact that, hey, you're a nobody. Why the hell should I listen to you? And I would reply back that it's the very sake that because you don't think you have to listen to me is why you should. And if the Zen student has any spark of illumination in them, they would consider doing just that. But no, once again, I get shown the door and told to never come back, and in fact, they're going to call the police next time I show up and have me thrown out on trespassing charges. So what can you do in such a situation other than write them a letter or send them an email or perhaps make an audio file that tells them of these very things? They won't listen no matter how much I try. And they basically say, oh, well, that guy, Mr. Dark Zen, they're all deluded, they're in a cult, and gee whiz, maybe they're eating babies on Sunday. So you could kind of understand that they pretty much paint a dark picture about anybody who brings up the fact that their shit stinks. Yet, I do not give up hope on them. I will continue preaching, continue having my say, probably until the time I am dead, which is probably not long from now. Please feel free to share my rant with your fellow favorite Zen student or your favorite Zen teacher, and let me know what they say. Might be amusing, might be interesting. Heck, it might be downright insightful and enlightening. One never knows. Thank you very much for listening, and take care.